等一下，听我说吧. I know what you're thinking. I'm not racist. I am genuinely in a very Chinese time in my life. You actually love learning about Chinese culture. In fact, after doing your Tai Chi in the morning, you made some congee with green onions and delicious youtiao Chinese donut. Very authentic. And in spite of US propaganda, you actually have some very educated opinions on Chinese geopolitics. You are dedicated to actually learning about Chinese culture. Well, I am too. Really, I don't know that much about Chinese culture, despite my Chinese ethnicity. I'm a fourth-generation American, and I actually had to Google Translate those first couple words in this video. Pretty good pronunciation, though. I took a few classes in college, although that was Mandarin, and technically my family's Cantonese. Anyways, I know your next thought. This guy is not fully Chinese. I know. I'm actually half white, so I have to learn about Chinese culture the hard way, like you guys. I guess I'm entering a more Chinese time in my life as well. It's a bit more serious for me, though. Every time I approach someone who I assume is more Chinese than me and try out my shoddy Mandarin, I feel embarrassed. I know that feeling is true for any new Mandarin learner because the language is really hard. Doodly-doo. Doo-yi-doo. Doodly-doo. Scooby-Doo. But sometimes I can't help but let negative thoughts slip in. I don't really know what I'm talking about when it comes to Chinese culture. Really, that I'm not Chinese enough. A fractured identity, I guess. But hey, we're all trying, right? Being in a very Chinese time in your life is a good thing nowadays. But I don't get to leave that Chinese time in my life, even as perceptions of Chineseness change radically in the United States. So, maybe that's the difference. Let's break it down. This conversation really falls into the question of cultural appreciation versus cultural appropriation. In many ways, this meme is appreciating Chinese culture. Things like using traditional Chinese medicine techniques, learning the Chinese language, and of course, cooking delicious Chinese food are definitely positive. Learning things from other cultures and gaining an appreciation for them is actually one of the coolest things that humans can do, in my opinion. On the cultural appropriation side, though, the most obvious parallel to me is the rise of Korean and Japanese popular culture. Weeaboos and K-pop stans idolize Asian cultures to the point of absolute cringe.
Okay, you are under arrest for being too hot. You have the right to remain sexy, but everything you say can and will make me blush. So, put your hands in the air
Hell no!
and come to kiss me.
Of course, this isn't actually mocking the Asian ethnicities, just more identifying with a culture that isn't your own. The mocking and demonizing is saved for black and brown people. In a pessimistic interpretation, this meme is an example of our status as model minority. Asians are something that minorities and whites should copy. On top of that, this meme also coincides with China's economic rise as a system alternative to the US's market capitalism. China is run by a single communist party that has control over its industries, while the US seems completely beholden to the demands of its large companies. The Chinese Communist Party's philosophy of socialism with Chinese characteristics has guided market forces to not only grow GDP, but to provide material benefits to the people in China. This is something that young, left-leaning American meme makers have noticed as they entered a very Chinese time in their lives. A strong alternative to a system that seems to be failing in the US. But I remember 2020. That was not a very Chinese time in our lives. In fact, stereotypes about bat-eating, totalitarian, COVID-spreading Chinese were the norm. That shocking increase of anti-Asian violence in the US really shows how arbitrarily opinions will change about us. Asian Americans are reminded again that most often they are used as a political pawn. We switch between a culture to aspire to and then a culture to be suspicious of. Also, I think there's something about the way that this joke is told that kind of sets off an alarm for me. You've met me at a very Chinese time in my life. The joke exists with many jokes that well-meaning white people make about other races. Right on the borderline.
Yeah.
Fucking Chinese down there.
I wonder how that started. They just built one fucked up looking building and people were like, all right, no one said anything.
Let
Let's
the fucking live there, huh?
Well, they
In our current neoliberal cultural atmosphere, whites are under increased scrutiny for how racist they're actually being. It's a subtle game where people need plausible deniability for overt racism. Therefore, the most prevalent racists of our time have to provide real evidence for the essential quality of races. Welfare queens, Somalian scammers, and illegal Venezuelan drug dealers. 6 years ago, that solid evidence was bat soup eating Chinese. These stereotypes change to fit to whatever is beneficial for the political establishment at the time. To be fair, the whites who participate in the Chinese time in our life meme react with sensitivity when it comes to dealing with minorities, which comes from this liberal sensibility of multiculturalism. The intention of multiculturalism is all well and good on an interpersonal level, but the ideal encounters problems when applied at a policy scale. The Democratic Party specifically adopted the strategy of multiculturalism when it came to the problem of ethnic diversity in the United States. Democrats appreciate all cultures and are more sensitive to their struggles, but they don't ever implement any policy that actually helps disadvantaged people. Only half-measure policies like affirmative action and DEI, which have been easily dismantled by the Republican Party. Speaking of Republicans, they think that this woke problem has gotten completely out of control, and they want to return to some idealistic American way of life that apparently existed at one point. Maybe when white people could just be as racist as they want and wouldn't have to hide anything. Anyways, these are the cultural boundaries as defined by lawmakers, and thus that's where white people have to operate culturally. So by comparison, I guess these white people who are in a very Chinese time in their lives are actually doing pretty good, I guess. At least they aren't doing yellowface or reporting people to ICE, I guess. The bar's pretty low. You Met Me at a very Chinese time in my life is particularly interesting to me because it is inspired by a variety of ethnic, cultural, and political phenomena. The meme denotes a performance of Chinese ethnicity, literally a very Chinese time in your life. I've mentioned in past videos that proving my Asianness was a serious endeavor. This is a common problem that many diaspora ethnic minorities encounter. Cultural critic Chow describes this problem as coercive mimesis, which is an expectation of authenticity placed on an ethnic minority in a white society. Therefore, the ethnic's natural defense mechanism is a performance of one's own ethnicity. When minority individuals think that, by referring to themselves performing their ethnicity, they are liberating themselves from the powers that subordinate them, they may actually be allowing such powers to work in the most intimate fashion, from within their hearts and souls, in a kind of voluntary surrender that is, in the end, fully complicit with the guilty verdict that has been declared on them socially long before they speak. I've talked at length about Chow's ideas in my K-pop Demon Hunters video, but it's relevant here for obvious reasons. While my imitation of some ideal Chineseness might be more serious to me, to the non-Chinese subject, it is a strange type of satirical performance. The non-Chinese subject walks a tightrope of trying to be respectful to a culture while imitating it for laughs. You don't want to don a yellow face, of course, but you perform Chineseness through what Chow calls ethnic details. That is, wearing chi pao, cooking congee, or speaking Chinese really well for a white guy. When that gesture happens, it is then in the Chinese viewer's purview to decide how it should be judged. Almost like having a token to confirm that you're not racist, right? So many authentic Chinese on the internet have shown approval and actually gave tips on how to become more Chinese. A lot of likes and views all around, of course. Now, am I saying that those Asians are doing that just for white approval? Not necessarily. I think there's a lot of things at play here. This meme coincides with the rise of China not only in the economic sphere, but in the cultural sphere as well. The Chinese diaspora feel good about receiving the Japan and South Korea treatment, but it also naturally leads to more questions about cultural appropriation. Now, I don't know if y'all were on the Asian side of TikTok when H-Mart Gate happened a few months ago, but I think it's a great example of this. A half-white, half-Korean girl, Madeline, made a TikTok that blew up where she said that she side-eyes white people at the Asian grocery store, H-Mart. She was part joking and part serious, but opened up a huge online discourse. Should us Asian Americans be more welcoming to white people coming into our spaces? Then, two large Asian creators who deem themselves as political activists pounced on Madeline and sort of like tore her apart in this drama slop fest while defending white people's right to enter the Asian grocery store without any vicious side eyes. And of course, they pointed out that she was not full Asian. Not fully authentic. This inter-Asian drama blew up outside of the community a little bit, particularly with black people. I think a lot of black people saw a parallel between this H-smart phenomenon and non-black culture vultures who appropriate black American culture for their own benefit. Recently, I watched a great video by Pillboy, shout out Pillboy, that explained how selling your self-respect as a black person has two effects. One, making other black people cringe, and two, getting an absolute fuck ton of views. In the United States, saving white people's feelings and gaining their approval is a great way to make a huge profit as an ethnic minority. It is Ray Chow's performative, coercive mimesis, but cranked up to 11 by social media. Algorithmic social media platforms, the majority of which are gigantic American companies, heavily reward this type of content. Of course, us Asians have our own self-deprecating jokes that we use for approval as well. I experienced this approval firsthand when I indulged in these jokes for attention back in my school days. Being the funny Asian kid was an interesting phenomenon where my face kind of stopped me from fully fitting in, but it could benefit me as a clown. I think myself and many minorities in the United States experience what W.E.B. Du Bois calls double consciousness. One part of you is here as an American, but another part of you always has a critical eye of how you're viewed by the white American society. It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a black person, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. It might be silly to compare the extraordinary suffering of late 19th century Jim Crow to the very Chinese time in my life meme, but this passage has stuck around for so long for a reason. That issue of two-ness is a principal problem addressed by Chow's coercive mimesis. You see that I am Asian, thus I feel that I must give you a cultural performance to prove my authenticity. I am aware of how my ethnicity is seen. White people don't have to worry about that. Therefore, when the meme is served to the Chinese viewer, there is a certain coercive return, which is to approve the satirical performance as authentic. After all, us Asians are very respectful. Therefore, I splay myself open as a minority whose culture is free for anyone to participate in to save their white feelings of insecurity. What if I shut it down or called it racist? Then I am shut out of our conversation entirely and removed from any possibility of integration. Just another lonely Asian, barred by the white society. Asian discrimination is very strange in that way. Our obedience is stereotyped and propagated and made into that model minority that the lower races should strive to achieve. If the Asians can do it, why can't you? Historian of Asian Americans Robert G. Lee described the archetypal characters that changed over time along with perceptions of Asians in the United States. The coolie, the yellow peril, the gook, and the model minority. Lee describes the model minority as the endpoint for Cold War racial logic. The representation of Asian Americans as a racial minority whose apparently successful ethnic assimilation was a result of stoic patience, political obedience, and self-improvement was a critically important narrative of ethnic liberalism that simultaneously promoted racial equality and sought to contain demands for social transformation. It was intentional U.S. domestic policy to make sure that Asians didn't go out of line. In the wake of the Korean War, Lee describes multiple different wartime acts, like the Emergency Detention Act, which legalized the creation of concentration camps for any group deemed foreign adversaries. The Trading with the Enemy Act banned transfers of money for Chinese suspected of collaborating with the communists back home. These are among the litany of other obscure laws that systematically pushed back on Chinese rights in the wake of Mao Zedong's Red Menace. Anti-communist elites in Chinatowns cooperated with FBI to capture any communist Chinese and have them deported. With the fear of receiving the same fate as interned Japanese Americans during World War II, many Asians complied and kept their heads down low. After the Civil Rights Movement, Asians were further weaponized in their useful model minority status. The 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act caused so-called brain drain from more developed Asian countries by prioritizing highly skilled workers in immigration. This meant that first-generation immigrants from China, Korea, or Japan were already middle class by the time that they got here. Therefore, the model minority has a head start as opposed to the other races they are ruthlessly compared to. Racial essentialist theories like the bell curve and so-called traditional self-sufficiency use racist pseudoscience to solidify Asians' place in the American hierarchy of races. Even pop science, like the famous Time article, "Those Asian American Whiz Kids," claim that the Confucian ethic drives people to work, excel, and repay the debt they owe their parents. It's a total stereotype. It's the liberal version of the model minority. These Time article writers know about Confucianism? Very authentic. They must be in a very Chinese time in their lives. The other side of this racist structural mechanism that concerns Asian Americans the most, though, is what Lee calls the gook. Model minorities embodied a certain obedience, but by the time of the Vietnam War, which was a huge, extremely costly war for the US, Asians were regarded with more suspicion. Again, the model minority can become the dangerous Viet Cong, or gook, at any time. In the context of these contemporary crises, the intact and traditional Asian American family is promoted as a model of productivity, savings, and mobility, not just for African Americans or Latino families, but now for all American families, including those of the white middle class. Simultaneously, however, in post-Vietnam and post-liberal American popular culture, the Asian American is represented as the invisible enemy, an embodiment of inauthentic racial and national identities, the gook. We have witnessed this bipolar relationship this decade with the anti-Chinese sentiment and anti-Asian sentiment generally during COVID, now reversed with the positive reception of Chinese culture. Although Trump famously decried the China virus, violence was perpetrated to all East Asians, not just Chinese. All gooks were dangerous during the pandemic. Being blended together as the gook is a way to racialize Asians back into our non-existent yellow skin. Whenever one Asian goes out of line, either abroad or at home, we all pay the price. East Asian ethnicity has historically served as a useful political tool for the United States. Our amorphous form in American popular culture works well with the neoliberal status quo. The US version of ultra-capitalist neoliberalism needs a culture war to maintain its stranglehold over cross-ethnic working-class solidarity. Therefore, the two-faced model minority and gook stand as the perfect blockade against equitable redistribution of wealth and public services. So this hope is that this very Chinese time in your life doesn't actually end when we inevitably become the gook once again. Like I said, I know that the purpose of a very Chinese time in your life is a positive one with genuine intentions of trying to understand another culture. It is not direct mockery, but instead it's like an aesthetically ironic sort of attachment with a culture that isn't your own. That being said, there needs to be real acknowledgement of anti-Asian racism here in the United States if there is to be such a relationship. If this very Chinese time in your life can extend to real activism and understanding the weird intricacies of anti-Asian discrimination, then the real conversation of solidarity starts. Not just a funny trend, but a real way of genuinely empathizing with someone else. Because let's be real, I mean, impersonating a culture can just turn into yellow face so fast. Or at least it'll start becoming cringy like weeaboos. But in spite of all of that, this meme actually gives me a little bit of hope, I think. I don't think China is some perfect utopia. It has plenty of problems of their own, but I think that its rise has given people a different way to look at Asians. I think that understanding other people's feelings and cultures and history is like the only way to move forward at this point. So when you finally leave this very Chinese time in your life and food becomes Chinese food once again, keep in mind that we all can't leave our ethnicity, no matter how badly we want to. Like I say, every video so close to monetizing. Please subscribe if you can. If you made it this far, I love you so much. But that's about it. Bye-bye! You love learning about Chinese culture. In fact, after doing your Tai Chi in the morning, you made some kanji.